There we go.
Welcome, everybody, to a special session of Summer SPSM. I am Dr. Bart Andrews. I am from Behavioral Health Response, a delightful and amazing crisis agency in St. Louis, Missouri. And I am really honored to be here tonight. We have an amazing topic. But before we go on to the topic, there are a couple of things I want to talk about first. Everybody I know has been following the news about what's going on in Baton Rouge. And I think it's really important that we honor that event and recognize that everybody's been experiencing that. That's hit really close to home because one of our guests and the amazing Dr. April Foreman live in Baton Rouge. So we know that this event has hit really close to them as well. And so we're sending thoughts, prayers, and hoping that we get a break from this this cycle of violence that we clearly are caught in right now. So we're sending out our hearts, our hope that things settle down there. But in the honor of the work that we do, something that we can do tonight is we can push forward with our mission, which is to prevent suicide, and use social media to do that. And so that's why we're doing the show. And I think there's other news. Recently, and I think it just came out this week, Utah, in the state of Utah, for the first time ever, and I think this is the first time this has ever occurred in the history of the United States. I could be wrong about this, but I think it's a first, and it's not a good first, everybody. For the first time ever, the #1 cause of death for teens, and I want to say it was 11 to 17. Don't hold me to that, but I have a feeling that was the age range. The #1 cause of death in the state of Utah is suicide. Which brings us to tonight's topic. Tonight we're going to be talking about youth suicide, particularly with an emphasis on suicide prevention in schools. And as part of that, we have two wonderful guests, Brian Foreman and Dr. Jonathan Singer. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves briefly, and they're going to have a conversation about this very important topic. Brian, please introduce yourself to the group.
Okay, well, I'm Brian Foreman. I'm really glad to be here tonight. I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy schedule to kind of help answer some of my questions and hopefully give me a little bit more background, a little bit more information about teen suicide prevention and what we can do on the school level to help prevent it. I am an assistant principal at an area high school here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It's always been a concern. What can we do to help identify our students that are having some of those thoughts and struggling with some of those issues, and what can we do to identify them and I guess address what they have going on and how we can help them. It's always been a goal of mine is to do what we can to reach out to those students. So that's one reason why I was really interested in being involved this evening. And Mr. Singer, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
All right. Well, hi, I'm Jonathan Singer, and I am the co-author of the book Suicide in Schools. It's a practitioner's guide, and I wrote it with Terry Erbacher and Scott Poland, and they are two outstanding experts in the field of suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. And Terry and I wrote this book, or we came up with the idea for the book because she said, "Hey, Jonathan, what's a good practical guide for working with suicidal kids in schools?" And I said, "Well, David Miller, who's currently the president of the American Association of Suicidology, he's got a great book. It's a little bit light on some of the practical things, but it's a fantastic overview." And she said, "Well, I want a practical. I want to be able to grab the book off the shelf and answer." Like soup to nuts, what do we do in terms of, screening, prevention stuff, intervention, like what therapies work? What do you do after a suicide? What are some of the issues around lawsuits? How do we think about all of this as a whole? I was like, yeah, that doesn't exist as far as I know. She's like, well, let's write it. So we wrote it, and that's why we have the book we have. And I've been very grateful because it's been very well received, and And for me, I was able to tie in some of my scholarship around sort of the experience of school social workers in schools. I'm a social work professor at Loyola University in Chicago, and I am also the founder and host of the Social Work Podcast. And so I've been able to get some information out there about how to best work with suicidal kids, both through the scholarship, but also the podcast. And being part of SPSM is one of the things I'm most proud of in my life. So I'm very grateful to be here tonight to talk about this topic.
Oh, excellent. And I think one of the things that we have a really cool opportunity, we've always been on this show talked about how we need to get the message out and information out to the folks that actually are using this information, right? We often, in a lot of suicide prevention circles, folks are just talking to each other and we're not getting the word out to folks we need to. So having Brian here, who is a school administrator, and having a chance to put Brian in connection with you, John, I think is amazing. And so Brian, as you think about your experiences in the school system and crises or situations you've run into, what are the things that occur to you? What kind of questions can we help you answer? What kind of things would be helpful?
Oh, there's quite a few. I guess maybe for some people out there that haven't had a lot of experience, I know as a teacher when I was in the classroom, I didn't see it as much as I do from the head office or from the office. And some teachers may not understand why is it important that we have this understanding or be consciously on the lookout for students that may be having some of these suicidal ideologies and some of these thoughts. And I think being able to help people understand why it's important we search this out and what we're looking for, and how we can help identify this. And Jonathan, do you have anything you might want to add to that?
Yeah. No, I think those are. I really like that context, which is like if I'm a teacher or even if I'm a school administrator or I'm the cafeteria lady or like whatever my role is in school, why is it important for me to understand about this universe of suicide? Kids sit in classrooms and teachers have like one of the most difficult jobs in the United States. There are all of these pressures to help kids achieve, to learn certain things. There are all these tests and all this stuff that happens in the classroom, and hopefully their attention is on the academics, right? While at the same time acknowledging that there are other things going on, but their training is not in the other things that are going on. Exactly. And so you can have a kid that can be sitting in a classroom and struggling with thoughts of wanting to end his life, and that is never going to come up in the classroom. The teacher will not know about that because the kid is not writing it down in an essay and handing that essay in as sort of a cry for help. The teacher's not asking questions, and honestly, like the teacher really shouldn't be asking really probing questions. The teacher should be referring out for that to the extent that they can. And so there are a lot of times when teachers won't necessarily know about this. But in the instances when they do get a whiff of this, right? When they see an essay or a poem where a kid's talking about how the future is bleak and there's no place in the world for me, people would be better off if I weren't here. Right? Nobody really cares. My family's going to be happier when I'm gone. Yeah, they'll be sad for a little bit, but it's going to be better, right? If they get those little hints, right? Those are things that should be immediate red flags, and they should say, "Oh, hey, school mental health professional or whoever it is that they consult with in the school, like, what do I do?" And part of that gets to this idea of what a crisis plan is, right? Like, what does a school do when there's a crisis? And a lot of times crisis plans, which were kind of developed and implemented pretty quickly after Columbine to say, what do we do when there is kind of a school shooting, right? A lot of them don't include suicidal crises, which is a problem, right? Because that is a very serious school crisis. So Ideally, you have a school where there is some sort of chain of command, and a teacher knows who they should talk to in the school to get some support if they have any indicator that there's a kid at risk for suicide.
Jonathan, because
Yeah.
I think this is really important information, and I think it'd be good to take us to from a teacher's perspective. A couple of different things. What should teachers be looking for? What should a teacher do? Right, if they see something, so what are they looking for? What should they do? And explain what refer out means, and when you talk about having a school mental health professional, and what that's all about.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for reeling me back in there, Bart. So some of the things to look out for kids around suicide risk. So any sort of change in mood that is out of the ordinary and seems to last for a while, right? I mean, anybody that talks about teenagers will say, well, 1 minute they're up, 1 minute they're down, and there are good biological, neurological reasons for that. But if you see a kid that was more on the sort of like if this is kind of the normal plateau, like sort of going like this and sort of, and then is down, and that lasts for a while, like that's something to look out for, right? Because we know that depression is present in a large percentage of suicide deaths. If you have kids that start to act out and engaging in risky behaviors that they typically didn't engage in before, right? There's sort of a recklessness about them, that kind of impulsivity. That's also something to look out for. What does a teacher see? Well, I mean, it varies based on classroom, and that's one of the most challenging things I think about being a teacher in a school is teachers know their students better than anybody, right? So they kind of have the baseline. Right, and if you have a classroom where you have students and everybody's acting out, well, that's sort of your baseline. So there's no way I can say, oh, well, this level of acting out is problematic, or this level of pulling back is problematic.
Yeah, well, and if I can step in for a second,
Yeah.
I think that goes back to good teachers get to know their students. You've got to know when Billy comes in and he's having a bad day. Be able to identify that. What is his normal, I guess, temperament or behavior when he comes in, and you can tell. I mean, I've been in a class for years and years and years, and I mean, I could tell after a month or two of having those students, okay, something's going on with Billy. What's going on today, Billy? And be able to talk with him. You're not feeling good. Did something happen on the way, on the way to school or this morning at home, and that sort of thing. But being able to have those conversations, being able to identify something's just not quite right, and I think you'll find out a lot of teachers are very in tune to that. And that should always be something they strive for anyway. I mean, how can you really teach the child if you don't understand them? But that's definitely one thing that kind of goes with what you're talking about there. Being able to identify, what's going on, or what's that mood like, or why has there been a change, and so forth. Sorry.
Yeah.
No,
it's okay.
Brian,
Bart, I know that
it's really important. I'm gonna stop you because what Brian said is it gets at relationship, right? And how important teacher and student relationship is. That's key. And Jonathan, one of the cool things in the book that you talk about are things that teachers shouldn't say and things that they should say. And so I don't know if you'd mind, because I think that there's some really great examples in there about teachers really trying to connect, but there's some things that are more helpful and some things that are less helpful.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember where exactly. I actually have my book right here so that I can refer to it. Awesome. That's great. I love it. Everybody's holding it up. So, some of the things that teachers shouldn't say are things like, I totally understand where you're coming from, right? Like, and the reason why you shouldn't say that is because they're going to say, well, no, you don't, right? You don't know where I'm coming from with this. You don't understand. So immediately it's going to break what we call rapport in the mental health world, or connection, right? It is a good list, Bart. Hold on, I want to find it because there are some good ones. I can't remember off the top of my head all of them.
Well, I might jump in here again real quick too, and I think any teacher that's done it for a while is going to also understand, when you're having that conversation with the student, this isn't something that you have from up at the podium and across the room. This is something when you kind of quietly go over to the student and maybe just kind of get down their level a little bit and just have that one-on-one conversation and not make it everybody's business, but just that, just that personal touch. Where they're saying, hey, just saw you didn't look like you were feeling very good today, want to make sure everything's okay, and that sort of thing. Make sure that you keep it personal. And, really you just need to listen, I think. That's a lot of it. The student, from my experience, most students are they're going to want to unload some of this stuff anyway. And if you give them that space and if you give them that safe place to go ahead and unload kind of what's going on, they'll tell you. I mean, most of those students, it'll come up. Very rarely do I run into some that are really guarded. Once they really they realize that, hey, you really do seriously care about how they're feeling, they'll unload, and they may not tell you the whole thing, but they'll give you an idea of kind of where you need to go from there. So.
No, they will, and actually, I'm going to pull you in a second, Bart, about this issue of how to talk to folks when you suspect there's suicide risk, because one of the things that is important for teachers to do is to get training in how to talk with kids about suicide risk. So some basic questions, right? Some basic things to ask, and actually one of the trainings that we highly recommend is the assist training, which Bart is a trainer for. And so, Bart, would you mind just throwing out some of the kind of the basic ideas that assist might do in a training, like just some basic things, like
sure,
this is how you talk with somebody that you think might be at risk.
Yeah, and absolutely, and it connects right to what Brian was talking about, because Brian hit the nail on the head when he talked about that students are really inviting us to connect with them, that a student, that most students, and there are some students, everybody, there's some difference, but most students that are struggling with something are sending out invitations, and they want somebody to explore those invitations. So the assist model really takes the belief that people at risk of suicide are actively attempting to engage their environment and the people around them, and that we need to do exactly what Brian was saying, which is reach out, connect them, say, I'm worried about you, you don't seem yourself, can you tell me what's going on? That sort of thing is really what assist is about. You've got to first explore what's going on with the student, then you ask directly about suicide, right? One of the things that assist is really big on, and you guys have heard a lot of people with experience talk about this, and Susan Stefan in her book emphasizes this tremendously. People who are fighting thoughts of suicide want to be understood, and Brian commented on that, right? That what youth are really wanting is for them to really care and really get where they're coming from, and so not jumping instantly into a plan of action, right, necessarily, particularly if you're comfortable in connecting with that student, but really getting a sense of what's going on in this person's life, that suicide has become a part of what's going on with them, that we really need to hear that story. And then obviously if we have a good understanding, we want to find out what's connecting them to turning towards safety, and then working on a safety plan. And a lot of those elements are in your book, and it's so impressive that Brian has kind of absorbed all this stuff. Now, Brian, have you ever had any formal training in suicide assessment or intervention?
There have probably been some trainings I've been to as far as my professional development and so forth in my years in education. But as far as, I was going to say, I believe every few years, mandated by the state of Louisiana, we do have training actually for all the staff. But to really kind of get down to, and I keep thinking this about going back to kind of a flow chart, or kind of a pattern,
yeah,
how you would approach, kind of investigate, and where you would go, kind of when you identify that student. I don't know if it's really that laid out and that clear, but basically getting to understand where the student's coming from, what's going on with them, and then making sure that we get a hold of a school counselor or school nurse and make sure that they get in there and follow the steps, I guess, that have been set up kind of by the district to kind of make sure that they're going to be taken care of.
Yeah, and I think.
Yeah, go, John.
Oh, I was going to say, and Brian, what you and Bart said about connecting with the student and hearing what's going on with them is key and essential. And teachers, I know that teachers and school counselors, like, they work together, right? This is not, sort of an outside relationship, but I don't think teachers should kind of underestimate that relationship that they have with the student, because the school counselor really does see student, is seeing the student kind of at that low point. But all of the information that teacher has about, well, this is what it looks like when the kid's doing well, or the kid said this to me, and let me tell you what that means, right? Let me decode that, because I know what that means, because 2 weeks ago this happened and that related to this other thing, and that's nothing that a school counselor will be able to unpack. And in a crisis, or a potentially emerging crisis, that is exactly the depth of information that a teacher should know to convey to a school counselor, so that the school counselor can then say, when I'm assessing how much risk there is for this kid, like, basically what I mean is, if this kid were to stay in the community, like go home tonight, hang out with the parents, like, what is the likelihood that this kid will do something to end his or her life?
You're right. And that goes right back to developing that relationship with the student, that how important it really is to be able to have that good, solid relationship where the teacher can identify there's stuff going on, where the student knows, hey, this is a safe place for me to talk, a safe person for me to talk with about this. And you're right, because a lot of them don't see the counselor as a day-to-day thing, where they, that teacher they see every single day,
right.
And they, they're used to that face. They know this is a person that's always there and that I can talk with, as opposed to the counselor who may be better trained in how to actually do an assessment or do a risk assessment. But the relationship there and the trust is really with that teacher. So I totally agree.
And also this idea of, like, a kid trusting an adult sometimes is not going to be the teacher. I mean, I'm sure every classroom that you were in, there were those kids that, despite your best effort, like, it just didn't ever click. Like, there was always this thing that was going on. You're like, I am not the person this kid's going to come to, right, when things are not going. This kid would not ask me to be in the foxhole with him, right?
Absolutely.
And so being able to know who is that person in the school. I mean, I talked before. I was like, is it the lunch lady? Is it the bus driver? Is it the janitorial staff? Like, who is it, right? Who is it in the school that kid is comfortable talking to? And that's why when you train schools, you have to train everybody in suicide prevention. It's not just about training, like, the school counselor and the teachers. Right. Or
and some of the times it'll be the students that will come up to you, and they'll say, "Hey, I'm kind of concerned about Susie. She's not acting herself." And they'll bring that concern to you. They're not sure. They know something's going on. They're not maybe sure how to handle it, or what the next step would be, or who they need to talk to. So they go to the teacher that they trust or that they know and say, "Hey, I know Susie'd never come talk with you about this, but I see this going on, and I'm really concerned. And what can we do to make sure she gets the help that she needs?" And so you're right. Sometimes it does come actually from students that they've seen, behaviors with their friends too.
So what you guys are talking about is being mirrored on the thread. I mean, people are tweeting out, everybody that's connected with youth in the school system, from the bus driver to who folks working in the cafeteria to the janitor, should be trained in some level of this and be on the lookout. So as we're talking about this, as I'm looking at the thread, Charles T. Franklin, who's a regular SPSMer, had some questions. And just listening to both of you, he always has good questions. So
great question.
Look, I haven't run into a school yet where people aren't like, we really need to be doing more about suicide with our youth. We need to be doing more to prevent suicide and address the needs of our youth. So why doesn't that happen? Do we have enough counselors? Do staff have enough time? Right? Do our staff have enough training, and are there procedures in place to address this? And I'd love to hear you both kind of comment on that.
Well, let me go first from kind of the mental health side and sort of the suicide prevention world side. First, no, there are not enough resources. It is the same in schools as it is everywhere else. And what sort of resources would be helpful? Well, first of all, it would be helpful to have not just an hour during the week of, like, training that teachers get before the school year starts, or even 3 hours, right, which is generous. It would be great to have a full day training for the teachers so that they could really get into role plays where they could really delve into this sort of stuff. And that it would be a long-term plan so that it's not just that it happens once. There was research that came out this year. David Goldston out of University of North Carolina, he looked at some of the first Garrett Lee Smith aggregate data, and he was able to say that in areas where there was suicide prevention programs, and this was all over the United States, that when those suicide prevention programs were going on, it did actually reduce suicide deaths. When those programs stopped, suicide deaths went back up. And so when we think about resources and funding, we have to say districts and states and individual schools have to be funded and willing to make this a priority forever. This is an ongoing thing. This is not like we've got a 3-year grant, we're going to like knock it out of the park, and then we're going to go on to some other priority. Like, this just has to be part of it. So that's one thing. The other thing is that having this crisis team, as I was talking about, the National Association of School Psychologists has the PREPARE model, and it lays out, all the details about how you, and we talk about it in the book, but how you develop a team and conceptualize and plan for crises. I mean, everything down to like, what do you do with the media? Right? If there's a suicide death, like, how do you interact with the media? You don't want to have to come up with that as you're struggling with dealing with the death of a student, right?
Yeah.
That has to be in advance, and it might look a little different than if there was a school shooting. So, like, anyway, so setting aside the time for the team. Who's going to be on that? Who's going to have that sort of special training? And then there's the piece which is probably the most difficult for schools. And this is not a criticism of schools, it's just this is how our world is, or the United States is. Everything is siloed. And so one of the most difficult things for schools is identifying and maintaining good referral sources for when you have kids that are identified at risk. If you're going to do a universal screen and you identify 16% of students that would benefit from a more comprehensive assessment, who's going to do that? It's not going to be the school counselor. Right, most likely.
And you make a point in the book, Jonathan, about being prepared. Right, the book really talks about you can't be reactive. And Brian, I saw when Jonathan was talking, there was something going on there. Tell us what you were thinking about while Jonathan was talking.
Well, I could definitely second everything he said there. We've always got room to improve. I do have to say that I am pleased that Louisiana does set time aside. We're every so often, or every other year, I believe, we're required by state law to go ahead and retrain the entire staff on, what does this look like, what should we be looking for, and things like that. But what I'm looking at or hearing more, I guess, out of this conversation is a lot of it is just being able to develop a good teacher-student relationship. Not only does that pay back dividends, obviously, in the learning environment, but also in this situation with that trust environment, that piece there. It seems to me that would almost be something that would pay dividends on so many different sides. That would be something we could work with every year with them. The other thing a couple things kind of jumped out at me, but having that team approach, also knowing ahead of time, what are we going to do, hopefully if, not when, but if this happens, and having that in place, because you'll have so many things going on. I mean, you'll have your own emotions involved, of course, in the situation, but then you've got all the students and trying to take care of the rest of the students and so forth. And I would really like to make sure we touch on that. What would that plan look like? How do we handle that? I know larger districts like my own, we have a very good media department, and I'm sure they do have plans and some things kind of mapped out. But luckily, knock on wood, I've never had to see what that is. But I would like to maybe get kind of your opinion on, what should that plan look like, and what should, all be involved in that.
Yeah. Does that work for you, Bart?
I say because one of the things the book does really well, Jonathan, and this is why what Brian is talking about is key. The heart of the schools are always in the right place. They've got good staff. They've got relationships. but the importance of having a pre-planned structure and some of the important details in place. And every place I go, John, I mention your book because it does such a beautiful, simple, straightforward job of saying, here's some things to have in place ahead of time. And it also does some things like, right now is not the time to be doing X, right? If you don't have X done right now, then don't do X. Then you need to worry about something else. So I think Brian's got a great question. What are some things that schools need to have up and running and ready to go before anything happens?
Well, you know,
in 2 minutes or less.
Yeah, in 2 minutes or less. Well, so the first thing I would say is everybody should check out the Prepare model. You can, find information in the book or online. But, one of the things that we talk about is that, there has to be somebody who's kind of like who's in charge of operations, right? The day-to-day, like who is in charge of school security and safety, right? And that person would be different than somebody who's in charge of like the emotional care of students, right? So the care coordinator. Then there's a medical coordinator, right? And these positions are oftentimes already available, right? You have campus security, you have a mental health person, you have a nursing staff, and who is the liaison with the community? Right, and who's the liaison with the press? Is that the same person? Exactly. And one of the things that I'll say that makes the media stuff more challenging these days is that 20 years ago, if you had a suicide death, you could plan how are we going to talk to the journalists? How's that information? What letter are we going to send out? Mm-hmm. These days, if a kid kills himself, like the students know before the staff, right? And so then there's this whole issue of how do we use social media to use what April says all the time, right? The solution to pollution is dilution, right? How do we make sure that the right information is getting out there, that we are able to have some monitoring of student social media? And that could be that you have a school counselor who has set up a professional Facebook profile, right? Or who is on Twitter as a professional, and everybody knows that, but they're able to see and read because they're part of some private Twitter accounts, or they've been friended on Facebook as a professional, right? And having somebody who has thought through this in advance and says, in September this is going to happen, so that God forbid something happens in March, kids aren't getting friend requests being like, hey, what's up? I just want to be your friend on Facebook. They're going to be like, no way, dude. So anyway, so I just want to throw that out.
So, Jonathan, this is obviously, and Brian is aware of this as well. We're heading into the end of summer. Schools are gearing up, right? Schools getting ready to start again. In fact, teachers are starting to report in some places already. In some places, first couple of weeks of August, right? If a school doesn't have a plan in place, what's step one? What's the first thing that they should be looking at the start of the school year? What would be your recommendation, Jonathan?
Okay, so the first thing would be probably if the school principal or some other administrator is not aware of one of these models like Prepare, they should just read up on it and set up a meeting and say, we need to set up a crisis plan, and we need to make sure that we have the following positions filled. Like I just said them, so I won't repeat them for time. But who's going to be in charge of these different positions, and how are we going to make sure that we're checking in over the course of the semester and over the course of the year, and kind of run through scenarios, right? And again, we're talking suicide, but again, school shooting. I mean, that's kind of the biggie these days for schools. And so, but how do we then modify this for suicide, right? When everybody is like, oh my God, the community's rallying around us, and everybody's like flipping out over a school shooting, but like when there's a suicide death and people start blaming each other, or they're so upset, they're like, what did I miss? Or like, we had a suicide last year, and then we just had another one. Like, how did we screw this up? Like, I thought we were doing so well, right? So there are all these other levels of things that happen when you have suicides, or suicide risk, but in this case, suicide, to really step that up. So.
That's key, and I'd make the recommendation: buy the fucking book, Suicide in Schools. Read it. I believe Brian has a signed copy. Brian, is that correct? Can you show us the signature?
Yes, let's see.
Yeah, show us the signature. Yeah, I don't have a signed copy. I wonder if Foreman has anything to do with the fact that you have a signed copy, Brian, but I don't. Brian, as you're listening to Jonathan talk and kind of process, because you've got a lot of experience in this, what do you think are the most helpful things for schools getting ready for this, for being prepared for this, getting set up to do this?
Well, I think having that plan in place is. I'm sorry, when he was mentioning, a school that, we had a suicide last year, and then to have another suicide, I mean, my heart just dropped. I mean, that'd be the sickest feeling in the world. I can't even imagine. Here in Baton Rouge, emotions are running a little high anyway, and so anyway, moving on. Having that plan in place, knowing, who are the go-to people, who is the person that's going to handle the PR, who are the people to get that message out, the support staff, the grief counselors. Getting those people identified, getting them the training that they need so they can do their job effectively. The other piece I like that he was talking about was the multimedia. I hate to say it, that I feel like we're kind of bringing up the tail end on that, but our schools are finally getting caught up with, oh yeah, we do need to have a Twitter account, we do need to have that Facebook page up and running. And I'm pleased to say that the school that I'm at now does a pretty good job, has a very active Twitter account that is followed by both students and parents, and so that we do have those lines of communications out there.
And what I'll say with that, which is fantastic, Brian, I'm so glad to hear you say that. And if you have those Twitter accounts, make sure you have templates set up in advance for what to say when things happen, right? So, because Bart knows this, like tweeting, it can take you like 10-15 minutes to get the tweet right. Right? Because you only have 140 characters, and you don't want to mess around with that kind of time. So if your tweet is, we understand there has been a death in our community, please go here for more information. Like, you want to have that set up, and you want to know that is the first thing that goes out, and you want to know that 20 minutes later, that is going to be followed up with another tweet that says, we're monitoring our Twitter channel, and we're on Facebook, and this other thing, boom. And then, because Twitter, the news cycle is like every 30 seconds, right? So you have to know how to use it. You can't just send one tweet in the morning and then the next day send another one, because people will be like, they're not responding. They're not on this. But you guys totally could be on this. You could be in your meetings. You could be doing this 110%. But if you don't know how to use the social network, then it's not going to show up. So templates, same for Facebook, right? Same for Snapchat, Instagram, anything that folks are on, and have those things reviewed for messaging guidelines. And it's one of the things actually we talked about with AFSP for their revising the after a suicide toolkit, and we talked about templates and things like that for social media. But it's definitely a good thing to have ready to go.
So there's a lot in here. There's a couple of different things I want to highlight. One, Brian hit on, and I want to come back to it. The emotional impact that suicide has on teachers, on school administrators, on the students, on the parents, right? This isn't like other things that happen in schools. There's a tremendous amount of emotion and pain that's involved in a suicide death. And I sometimes think that can be quite, it can really get in the way. What are some things that we can do about that? How do we address that, Jonathan? Because I think that's absolutely key.
Well, one of the things that is, well, for one, everybody experiences loss differently. And so so if we're talking about a suicide death, having a basic agreement that all loss is understood to be painful, and that everybody experiences it differently, and everybody's going to grieve differently, and so in a school system where there are certain schedules and rhythms, and because of this test or because of this weekend or because of this big trip or whatever, like there's a rhythm that rhythm will be disrupted, and it will be disruptive for different people differently. So having that flexibility and having administration be able to say, to staff, look, I realize some of you are going to be great for the first couple weeks, and then week 3 is going to hit, and you're not going to want to get out of bed. And for others, it's going to be tomorrow. And we acknowledge that, and we honor that, and this is some of the ways that we're going to help work with that. The other, a second thing is that when we look at burnout, the burnout literature, the kind of the secondary trauma literature, one of the things that can happen at an organizational level is to give people some control over what their work schedule looks like, right? What their workload looks like. And again, I realize in a school, there's only so much wiggle room. You can't be like, take half the kids out of my classroom, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can't do that. But there are certain things. There are things that every employee takes on that is kind of a little bit above and beyond their job description. And so for those that are really struggling, and you're like, wow, this person's really having a hard time, administrators can say, okay, what can we say? We're going to take this off your plate for a week, maybe till the end of the year. And it could be a burden for others, but acknowledging that and recognizing that, that's definitely something that can happen that a lot of people don't think about, right? And I say that because we think about burnout prevention, and we think about stress reduction, and we think about make sure you do yoga, make sure you're drinking enough water, right? Make sure that you're sleeping well, and we really put it on the individual. But I wanted to just make sure I emphasize the point that there are things that can happen in organizations that have actually been found to be more effective at burnout prevention and reducing secondary trauma than things that individuals are able to do.
The system needs to support the staff, and if we're not doing that intentionally, we won't be as effective in helping our students. Brian, what kind of resources, what kind of things can administration bring to bear to support staff and create that important connection and safety net for the staff who are dealing with this sort of a situation, sort of a loss?
Well, I mean, we definitely, none of us have been out of the classroom that long, and we're hopefully spending hours a day going through classes anyway to see, how those teachers are faring and how those students are faring, and trying to get a measure on the emotional level or emotional intensity of what's going on, and when you have a crisis or a situation like that going on. Again, I think Jonathan did a good job talking about removing some things from that, from those plates. Sometimes they're non-negotiables, obviously, for teachers. We've got to get the grades in on time. We've got to, X, Y, and Z. But maybe your lesson plans don't need to be 2 weeks ahead of time. Maybe 1 week's fine. Or, there are some areas that there's some flexibility that we can definitely try to remove some of the stressors, particularly in times when you've got a crisis going on or a very emotionally draining situation. And I think teachers need to reflect on that too. When it's students too, at the end of a semester, or maybe with some big project coming due, I know every week we do this extra homework assignment, but this week with your project due, we're just going to take that off the plate. So teachers make those adjustments with students all the time. And I think it's good, though, that that you did kind of bring up the fact that we need to make sure that, as well for staff, that we make sure that when those stressful times are there, that we do make allowances for that as well.
Yeah.
I think Brian is talking about how it's key that administration is willing, ready, and able to support their staff. They've got that heart. They're thinking about their staff. Right. Jonathan, from a systems perspective, what are some things that we could do to put in place that would help that process?
That would help administrators do that?
Help administrators, yeah. What kind of things would help structure that for them?
Well, again, going back to this crisis plan, knowing who's in charge of what, and knowing that when there is a suicide, and again, we've sort of moved into what we call postvention in the conversation, which is like, how do you intervene after a suicide death? And I want to say that's not the entirety of suicide prevention in school.
No.
But for that, I mean, certainly you want to know who are the external resources that are going to be able to come in and support the staff. One of the things that we don't often talk about, we mentioned in the book, but the people who are actually at highest risk for suicide in a school are the staff, particularly the men who are middle-aged, right? Who are white, and so you have, we're talking about kids, but if you have somebody who might be at risk as an adult, right? And that is the suicide death. You have to plan for that as well. If there's a kid that dies, and then that weighs heavily on the teacher, and the teacher has battled with depression and maybe other things, and that adds to their risk, you want to be able to head that off and to address that. And so again, having those conversations, who's coming in, how are we supporting them, and saying, yeah, dude, go get counseling, man. That's amazing. That is strength. That is courage, right? Yeah, we're gonna, if you need an hour after, we're gonna allow that in your schedule.
Yeah. Well, we talk about having that relationship with students, that students felt comfortable coming in and approaching, teachers. I think administrators have to have that comfortable relationship with their staff. So their staff feel comfortable coming in and saying, hey, I've got some stuff going on, and sometimes you don't even realize you have that relationship till the person shows up at your door. I had a couple instances this year where I had some staff members show up, and they were really working with some really horrible things. And what's bizarre is they were amazing in their job. They did a fantastic job taking care of their students. They, really were getting after it and just being outstanding in the classroom. And I thought, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was all going on. And just simply didn't know what sort of support they needed, or even just being that ear for them to bounce stuff off of. It made a big difference. It's something you really you don't think about. One thing that you mentioned earlier too, about social media, we talked about social media and using it as a way to kind of, I guess, control the message and control, how you would work with the situation after it occurs. But have you had a lot of experience in using social media maybe as a suicide prevention type piece? John, you know what I'm talking about there? Maybe as a outreach tool or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, this whole community is called suicide prevention and social media. So in a way, like, stuff that we do every day is about that. But specifically in schools, it might be that Twitter is one of the ways that you use it, but it could be that there are other apps, it's called applications, apps that you would use. Like, it could be that WhatsApp, for example, which is, it's a messaging app. And it could be, and you can create groups. It could be that that's one of the ways that you use social media, right? That you use one of these apps to connect with students. That there might be a group of students who are kind of your eyes and ears on the ground, right? And so somebody in the school is able to kind of have an ongoing group. Where they're just kind of interacting with them, and these students are like, oh, this person's cool. Like, I can message this, or I can use slang. I can say LOL or whatever it is, right? Or I can do a funny meme, and they get it, right? So this is a person. So that's one way that you can use kind of social media or technology to really tap into students. And again, I say WhatsApp because it's a messaging thing. A lot of folks use it, but it's not necessarily like Twitter or Facebook. But there could be those sorts of things that are exactly what's needed. But having somebody whose ears on the ground and say, oh, you know what kids are using in school a lot is whatever it is, right? And say, let's start doing that, and having a school that is okay with that, right? Having administrators say, yeah, we do need to do this, right?
Mhm.
We can't ignore this. We have to do that. Just the last thing that I'll say is that, and SPSM's been doing that this summer, is that there's, the cats of SPSM. There's this thing about addressing really intense topics with things that are not intense, like cats, right? Or a silly meme, like the most interesting man in the world thing, and knowing how to use them and how to have the message conveyed can be incredibly powerful. And so if you have folks that show an aptitude for that, encourage that.
Mhm.
Say, go ahead, do this, because we really, really need you to do this, because it's going to help us connect with folks more so than the stodgy memo that we would normally send out.
Yeah. Can you help me? What is the CATS thing?
So Cats at SPSM, Shai Lewis, I don't think Shai's with us tonight, but Shai Lewis created this there's an account actually at Cats of SPSM and a hashtag Cats of SPSM, and various folks have been snapping shots of their cats with inspirational messages, or cats asking people to call out and reach for help, putting the suicide lifeline number out there, putting the crisis text line number out there. And it was really interesting when I was checking my Twitter stats that one of the tweets that got the most traction was a Cats of SPSM tweet, which I'm going to be honest kind of pissed me off a little bit. I'm tweeting out all this amazing stuff that's important and vital that people should read, but the Cats of SPSM got the most activity. So what do you know? April knows everything, and Shai Lewis did an amazing job getting that off. But I think this is one of the things that's really important, and this has been commented on the thread. So there's other resources for youth. Maybe they want to talk to school. Maybe they don't want to talk to the teacher. What kind of resources can we get? Folks are talking about the crisis text line, about the suicide lifeline. Jonathan, Brian, both of your thoughts on are you getting that information out of schools, or are you taking that information? Are they using it?
Brian, I'm going to let you answer that. Do you guys have the number for the crisis text line? This is this amazing resource where you can text. Was it 741-741, and you can start a text conversation with somebody about a crisis. You can, if you have your phone in the classroom and you're in crisis, you can go. So is that getting out there?
Actually, I am not sure if we use that particular one. I do know that our counseling department does have a plan in place and multiple resources that they use, both within our school, within the district, and within the community. There's a multi-level approach. But I will have to check with them. Actually, you were talking about how staff members are coming back on duty, and our counselors will be returning on the 21st. So this Thursday, I'll have that conversation with them and try to get our, hey, let me see what that plan looks like. How was that all mapped out, and make sure that we are all set and ready to go. So that's definitely something I will be talking to them about, and we will definitely look at the text plan. I think that's fantastic and a good resource. I wonder if there are posters out for, is it marketed towards, not students obviously particularly, but how is that marketed, I wonder?
Well, yeah, no. The crisis text line actually is marketed towards youth, students. It absolutely is, and so, April Foreman is an expert in this area, and so she would definitely be somebody that, if you could catch her ear for a moment, could
yeah.
But no, so I think the crisis text line, definitely the suicide prevention lifeline, which is it's a number that you can call that then gets connected to crisis lines throughout the country. And the suicide prevention lifeline plays an incredible connecting resource, so that you don't have to necessarily know the local crisis number. You can give that out, and it'll connect folks. But having folks and knowing that in schools you should have somebody who knows these resources and who has already reached out to these resources. I sort of touched on this earlier, but this is so key to having a support network in place out in the community? Who are the therapists that have experience working with suicidal kids? What are the hospitals like? Are the hospitals willing to coordinate with school counselors? Sometimes you send a kid to a hospital, which is a whole can of worms. Lots of questions about how helpful hospitalization is. So I'll just sort of put that in the corner there. But are they going to share paperwork? Are they going to coordinate with a reentry plan? So are there psychiatrists in the community that are going to be able and willing to work with students in your school? What sort of resources and supports does the school have to help to pay for things that students might need? If the school doesn't have any funds, where are they going to come from? I think one of the myths that school staff sometimes have is they say, well, if I refer somebody, we're going to have to pay for it. And so addressing that with your staff to kind of debunk those myths about, well, no, actually, we don't have to pay for things that our school counselor says you really need to go talk to somebody. Like, that doesn't fall in our budget. Don't worry about that. Like, don't make that be a reason why you're not referring things or referring to them.
This is key, Jonathan. Schools need to know what resources are available in their community and have those available. If you're lucky enough to be in the St. Louis area, for instance, we actually have dedicated Youth Connection helplines that BHR answers with chat, text, phone numbers, and we can actually do care coordination and get you. And we go to the schools, we present in the schools. And to your point, Brian, this is really important. We've learned that in getting the crisis text numbers out, the phone numbers out, we actually go to the school, get access to the students, and have them program that information right on their phones when we're there presenting in the classroom. We actually have people, hey, get your phone out, put this number in your phone, put this text number in your phone, put this URL in your phone, save that. And the other thing we've learned with youth is if you say, you might run into somebody that needs this. We find that with youth face-to-face, if you tell them if you have this so you can help somebody else, they're a lot more willing to take it than if you focus on them. But that's just a little tip. So we're up at the final. Oh my God, this time just went by. You both have been absolutely amazing. I mean, we only got 4 minutes left. So we're gonna do a brief final thoughts. Jonathan, I'm gonna let you go first, and then we're gonna let Brian take us home. This has been absolutely fantastic, both of you. So Jonathan, final thoughts.
Yeah. So. All schools should have a crisis plan that includes suicide prevention. People should know who in the school is going to be able to actually do a suicide risk assessment. There is a tool that we developed for our book that doesn't exist anywhere else, but that is becoming one of the most valuable things for the book, which is called a suicide risk monitoring form, and that's how do you monitor risk over time with a kid who's already been identified at risk. And this is essential for schools where school counselors have limited time and limited resources to do something that maybe in a community mental health setting people would do on a regular basis. So so definitely check that out. And the last thing that I'm going to say is that Brian, I'm so glad you were willing to ask these questions and engage in this conversation, because although I love that school counselors, social workers, psychologists are buying the book and reading it, it's really the administrators that need to be on board with this, because administrators set the tone for the school. And if you have administrators that don't think this is important, as much as somebody tries in a school that might be a school counselor, it's going to be hard to make it that important. So I really tip my hat to you for thinking about this and making this a priority and having this be a conversation we have tonight.
Yeah. And Brian, I got to let you know, just watching the feed, folks have absolutely loved this show. We've had great interactions, lots of good stuff, and a lot of folks in sync on how important this is. So really appreciate you coming on. And tell us, what are your final thoughts for the group?
Well, first of all, I want to thank both of you for spending your evening kind of educating me a lot on the topic. I think I speak for most educators when I say, we want to do whatever we possibly can for our students. Whatever, you can always bring it back to what's best for the kids, what's best for our students, what's going to help them to develop to the individuals, to be the people that we want them to be, and to be successful and healthy and productive members of society. And I think, spending the time to kind of I guess, become more familiar with how this can be integrated into schools and the best ways to do that. I'm definitely tomorrow morning I'll be at it first thing, trying to evaluate what we already have set up in place, see what pieces we have that are working well, what pieces aren't working well, maybe start some of those conversations, those dialogues, both at the building level and maybe even going up to the district level to see, are there things we can be doing better to help serve our students and to monitor and to keep them safe and to make sure that the resources are there, make sure that the relationships are there, and try to, again, just making sure that our students are safe. I do appreciate your time this evening, gentlemen. Thank you again.
That's awesome.
Brian, you have to know, it's such a treat for us to have somebody like you who's in the school system, who's not, where suicide prevention isn't a part of that's not your full-time job, where it is for a lot of us, and for you to come in and let us learn from you and actually to reach somebody that can make a difference out there. So thank you. This was a wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Jonathan Singer. The book is amazing. I push it constantly. And a great show. I want to thank you all so much, and good night, and we love all you all. Signing off.
Good night.